So we'll finish Perek Beis of Avodah Zarah, Mishnah Zayin. The Mishnah now lists foods of an idolater, of a goy, that are entirely mutter, that are entirely permitted, even though we would have had reason to believe that they may be also. We'll see in a minute how that plays out. And the Mishnah lists many of the items that we learned in the Mishnah Vav, many of the items listed as prohibited in the previous Mishnah, permitting them, however, under certain conditions. So here we start. Elu mutarim b'achila. These items of goyim, of idolaters, are permitted for Jews, even for eating. The first case being cholov shecholva of the kachovim v'Yisrael ro'eyu, milk that an idolater milked, with a Jew seeing him, with a Jew observing. In which case, there's no concern that the idolater may have mixed milk in with the kosher milk of a non-kosher animal. And we saw in the previous Mishnah that the Chachamim prohibited a goy's milk, cholav akum, if a Jew is not present for the milking process. Favos, because we're concerned that the idolater may mix non-kosher milk with the kosher milk. Now it is obvious from the previous Mishnah that if a Jew, however, saw the actual milking process, that the milk is permitted. So now the Mishnah teaches us here that the milk is permitted even if the Jew is not watching the process per se, but he is in a place where the goy can be seen. He's sitting nearby, he's standing up. So even in such a case, we're not concerned that the idolater who is aware that milk of a non-kosher animal is also to the Jew, we're not concerned that he will mix the non-kosher milk. There is a Jew nearby. There is a Jew seeing. There's a Jew standing. There's a Jew sitting nearby, and he can see the goy. The second item is devash. Devash, honey of an idolater. And ve'adavdovniyos afal pishem enatfim, and grape clusters, even though they are dripping with their own juices. Let's stop for a second with the dvash. With the dvash, with the honey, we need not be concerned that the idolater may have added wine to the honey, which would be the concern. Why is that? Why shouldn't we be concerned? Why is dvash stam of a goy permitted? Because wine ruins the taste of the honey. Now, the truth is, although idolaters cook their honey to remove it from the honeycomb, so perhaps it should be also al bishul akum, but the honey does not become prohibited as bishul akum, because the prohibition applies only, as we said in the last Mishnah, to something that cannot be eaten raw. She'ein nechal chai. Okay? But honey is nechal chai. Nor do the flavors of non-kosher food that have been absorbed in the walls of the idolatrous pot prohibit the honey, because it's pogum. It's pogum. The next case was davdoniyos afal pishem enatfim, grape clusters, even though they are dripping with their own juices. What's the story here? Although the prohibition of wine of idolaters applies, right, yain nesech, applies also to grape juice, but the prohibition of yain nesech does not come into effect until a certain stage of the wine-making process has been reached. And the fact that the grape clusters are dripping from their own juices, it does not yet bring it under the rubric, under the category of yain. It's not yain as yet, so there are no issues to be concerned with. So we mentioned the halacha of purchasing from an idolater grapes that are dripping with their own juices. Now the Mishnah teaches a seitige halacha, a law, a side law, a side halacha applying to such grapes also in regard to tuma. As a rule, we know that a food does not become tameh unless it has first become wet through contact with certain specific liquids. So now the Mishnah applies this halacha to this case here. And the Mishnah adds that there's no issue of yain nesach in regard to grape clusters that are dripping with their own juices, but also ein bahem mishum hechsher mashke. These grapes are not considered prepared for tuma by a liquid because they are not meant to be eaten. And the owner is not interested in the liquid dripping out of them. Because the halacha is that a food can become tameh through contact with certain items that are tameh. Once the food has been prepared for becoming tameh by having been made wet with one of the following 7 liquids. They are shiva mashkin, water, dew, wine, oil, blood, milk, or bees honey. However, the owner must be interested in the liquid in order for the food to be considered prepared. In the case of our Mishnah, the owner has no interest in the juice dripping out because these grapes are meant for eating, not for drinking, and therefore they are not considered prepared as far as Hilchos Tuma is concerned. Weiter, the Mishnah continues. It lists of items of idolaters that may be eaten by a Jew. No Yisur Achila. Next case is Kvoshin Shein Darkan Losses L'Seichen Yain V'Chometz. Also permitted are pickled foods such as vegetables, kosher fish, and meats, if they are the type into which idolaters typically do not put wine or vinegar, in which case these foods remain permitted. The Chachamim prohibited pickled foods only when there's a concern that the idolaters added wine or vinegar to them. They did not, however, extend this prohibition, this gezerah, to items in which wine and vinegar are not added. So kavoshin she'ein darken losses u'seichen yain v'chometz may be eaten. V'toris she'ein atufa. Remember we had in the last Mishnah the toris fish now is ein atufa. The toris fish that is not finely chopped, and therefore can be recognized easily as a kosher species. It's recognizable through the appearance of its head, of its spine, its toris, which is a kosher fish per se. In the previous Mishnah, we learned that the Chachomim did not aser even larger pieces of toris in order to prevent someone from coming to eat smaller pieces. So that was the Torah Shein Tufa. If it's not finely chopped, it can be recognized as kosher, it can be eaten. V'tzir sheyesh badoga, and fish brine that has kilbis fish swimming in it, which shows what? Based on our understanding of the last Mishnah, which shows that the brine is from kosher fish. The brine is from kosher fish. Ve'ol shel chiltis, and the leaf of chiltis, which is not cut, and therefore does not contain any non-kosher flavors. Vezeisim glucose amigulgolin, and cakes of softened olives. What is that about? Olives were placed in round containers where they would become naturally heated and softened in their own oil. They were then pressed into a cake. They were then pressed into a cake-like shape. And the Mishnah teaches us here that we're not concerned that the idolater poured non-kosher wine into the olives to soften them, because again, it ruins the taste. Now, Rabbi Yossi comes along and says that there's an exception to the last halacha. Rabbi Yossi Omer, ashluchin asurin, olives that drop their pits, that is, their pits fall out when the olives are picked up, are also, says Rabbi Yossi, favos, because we must assume that the olives became soaked because their owner soaked them in wine, says Rabbi Yossi. That's how the pits came out so easily. And then comes the last part of the Mishnah, which speaks about something which we are not familiar with on a day-to-day basis, because we have no Mesorah about it, in contradistinction to Yemenites and others, perhaps. And that is Chagovim. Chagovim are grasshoppers. The Torah in Vayikra, Perek Yud Aleph, Posuk Chof Aleph, Perek Yud Aleph, Posuk Chof Aleph in Vayikra, permits eating certain types, certain species of grasshoppers. Nowadays, grasshoppers are not eaten in most communities. Since we are not familiar, since we're not proficient regarding the identity of these kosher varieties, we don't have an ongoing Mesorah about them. But lehalocha, the Torah says they're permissible if you know what they are, if you know who they are, if you know what the species are, if they could be readily identified based on the Mesorah passed on midore doros. But here, as far as our Mishnah is concerned, the Mishnah says, "Achagovim aboyim min aslula asurim," grasshoppers of kosher species that are being sold by a goy, by an idolater, from the basket, min aslula, are also. Why are they also? Are they kosher species? Because he pours his non-kosher wine on them to soften them right before he sells them. So mina salula, in which he may have very well poured in wine, is also mina heftek mutorim. But those that he sells from the storage, bin amuto, because idolaters do not pour wine on the grasshoppers in the storage bin, so that they should not get ruined. Grasshoppers that sit for some time in wine get ruined, the Meforshim explain. The Rav says, Mina Salula. Why are they Asurim? Mina Sal Shalifnei Achilvoni Asurim, Shemezalef Aleim Yain Kedei Sheisrachu. He puts wine on them to soften them up. But Mina Heftek Mutorim, says the Rav, Mimokum Shechonson, in a place of storage, Sheoitzum Oitzum Sham Zel Ze Mutorim, because Eino Mezalef Aleim Yain Achinoitzum Lifnemer. Achinoitzum on the front of Limko. He doesn't put wine in there. Therefore, they're mutar. And the Mishnah closes by teaching another halacha with similar rules. V'chein letruma. V'chein letruma. The same is true regarding truma. That is to say, what is the same? What is the same in regard to truma? The produce in the basket of an untrustworthy kohen, which is being sold as chulin, is also because we're afraid that it is really truma that he's trying to sell at the higher price of chulin. There are more people who buy chulin. However, produce from his storage bin is mutar. From his storage bin is mutar. Okay, we finished Perek Beis.